Well, the state has now passed a law requiring consultation. We'll see how that plays out, because to me as a lawyer, there's not a lot of teeth to make the agencies enthusiastically go about what they've been ordered to do. But it's an opening. It's a place where that dialogue can commence, and it's certainly a step beyond the way that Wabanaki voices were generally treated in the past. I note also Canada, again, had come up with the concept of traditional ecological knowledge. Now, it seems to be endemic to the English mindset that you have to give an acronym to something and then it has to have this name, but it just means really consulting Wabanaki people with what they knew and what they know, which is obviously, if you look at the histories of what happened to the sea-run fish, despite the state of Maine policymakers thinking they knew what they were doing, they really didn't. They had no idea what they were doing to the ecology around them, but they didn't want to ask.
Beyond consultation, are there ways that you could see Wabanaki citizens and leaders becoming more involved in shaping policy?
I think, again, working with their leadership. It's not that they don't want to be a part of the conversation, it's just they haven't had that. So how do you then create that? I think that's a good question, and it comes, again, kind of out of one of the recommendations of the report. You know, the issue with like TEK or consultation is Judd's point. Like, you can have voice, but does that voice actually have an impact on what things are doing? And then you have to look at the structure of that, because that's a hierarchy. You're asking somebody for advice, and then you get to choose whether or not you take that advice. I kind of more like the Mi'kmaq developed the two-eyed seeing, and I really don't think that's a new idea. You know, traditional Wabanaki governance was always been meant on creating a space where all voices could be heard, and then people would go and reflect about what they learned, and then they'd come back together and make decisions. Two-eyed seeing is about recognizing the strengths that Indigenous knowledge has and that Western knowledge has, and it brings them together. And when we look at how the state has managed resources, it's largely been their perceptions and moving those resources to other places. And now we're one of the places that's highest in food insecurity in the region. Bringing some of that food back and thinking about cycles of species, a very Wabanaki way of viewing that, sustaining that relationship over time. Like Judd was noting, people, non-Indigenous people relied on those fish too, that they don't have that. I tell stories from my community about, when they'd shut off the fish weir and they'd put a fish in each person's mailbox. It's kind of like a form of food security. And then they'd nail them up to their roof so they could dry. And I told that story in Beals, Maine, and somebody laughed, and I said, "Why is that funny?" And they said, "Well, we used to just hang them from our clothesline." And I love that, just because, everybody benefits from having more robust fisheries here and thinking about that. But again, those are more, those ideas originate from Wabanaki views of having been in this place for so long, but those ideas haven't been allowed to shape these conversations. So yeah, the next step is figuring out how to have that voice, how to let them shape those conversations.
Yeah, and the lawyer in me always comes back to what happens when things go wrong. Like, as you say, having consultation is fine as long as both people or both sides in the consultation are really listening and trying to learn. Our system of government is replete with instances where there is opportunity for consultation.
Yeah, I think we're thinking about consultation a little different. In the Wabanaki context, that would be as equals. But in your context, consultation, again, is more in that hierarchy. And I think that space has to be recreated altogether for that consultation to be effective. And again, you're right, but I'm thinking about it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking about the law requiring the consultations and what that can mean. I mean, It's like I used to joke with my kids, if you invent a word, you get first crack at spelling it. You know, the consultation legislation is sort of a new thing, and how it plays out depends upon how people approach it and use it. They're spelling it for the first time, so to speak, because you have to go back a long way in history before you see consultations between the white settler community and the Wabanaki people that looked like conversations between equals. Go back into the 1700s. One of the first steps has to be getting the state of Maine in the end to change its position on the way it wants to view the Wabanaki Nations, which is this attempt to view them just as towns. There's nothing else. And that's so far from the reality of what the Wabanaki Nations are, that it seems like you can only keep trying to shoehorn the foot into the shoe for a while, and then finally you got to give up and say, let's try a different way. But the state is not quite at that point yet. They've come close, but that's a legislative issue right now. But I think that needs to change before you get people thinking of equal consultation and of the more Wabanaki idea of everyone listening and then reaching some kind of consensus.
It's not an idea, it's a real thing.
Well, it is a real thing, but it's also an idea because it needs to be passed to other people.
Yep. And the only thing I disagree with you about is that I think the people need to be thinking about that before the legislation. And you are more familiar with tracking it over time than I am, but I have seen that there's more and more people that are growing in support of changing that distinction and definition of that tribes are defined as towns. And that's kind of one of the impacts of these policies, is that Wabanaki people as voters have so few voting capacity compared to non-Indigenous voters. And you have to think really in really complex ways to break that system, or to hear those voices that get consumed by that same system. And I see this within fisheries conversations too. Only the top 3 topics related to fishers get talked about. What that basically means is that anything related to tribal fisheries is not going to rise to the top. Mm. But when you have more people who are interested in supporting that, that's when you can make some of those changes. When I tell experience of Indigenous fishers to non-Indigenous fishers, they're sympathetic because they understand what it's like to be pushed aside by policies and governments and regulations. It's not in the same way, but they're sympathetic to that story. They just don't know it.